everyone. My name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we are going to be talking about the 7 levels of sexuality in BDSM. And before we get into that, I have 2 notes, which is one, I decided I'm going to say the word intimacy here whenever possible because I don't think the algorithm will like it if I say the other word 20 million times. So we're going to say that instead. And also, I started filming this and then I was like halfway done and I lost my voice. So I am going to try to get all the way through this. You might see some more cuts than normal because I'm going to really try to drink a lot of water, but that's basically what you need to know for right now. Now, for why I want to discuss this, I want to talk about this because I really feel like our community needs a conversation about this because currently the way that we talk about intimacy in BDSM is very limited. We usually say that BDSM is either non-intimate or intimate, and that really actually doesn't give you a whole lot of information because it is such a deeply personal experience. And I know I have gone through negotiations where I will say, you know, BDSM is non-intimate for me. I don't do this and that, but I can do this. And then somebody agrees to that and they go, okay, great, me too. And then we get into doing the scene and it turns out, okay, we had very different definitions of intimacy and this is now very uncomfortable and we are not really compatible. And so I want to give you all tools and language you can use to communicate with people to avoid those awkward, unnecessary aftercare moments or scene conversations in the middle of play. I want you to be able to find people that you are more compatible with up front and you have a better understanding of how you relate to intimacy in BDSM because it is such a personal journey. I think also one factor here too is that people have a very negative stereotype both ways actually about how people relate to intimacy in BDSM. If you say that BDSM is an intimate act for you, what people oftentimes will hear if they don't like that is they will go, oh, okay, well that just means that BDSM to you is mostly vanilla, it's like rough intimacy, you're just playing at it, you like hair pulling and choking and really like light BDSM stuff. You're not really a serious player because you include that level of intimacy in your play and that's what's most important to you. So therefore, you can't really be a true serious kinkster. On the other end though, for people that are not intimate with their BDSM, you'll also get the stereotype of you're like a gray blob, you are selfish, you don't want to have to give too much to your partner, you want to be able to lie back and get your spanking or your massage or your flogging and just receive and never have to give back, especially for bottoms or for submissives that are not intimate with their play. You get this feedback a lot of like, oh, well, you're just like, you know, being self-centered, you're just, you know, topping from the bottom, you don't want to have to give back, and it's very silly because again, ultimately, we all have our own different preferences, we all have different ways of relating to BDSM, and no one way is better than the other. The intention behind making a list like this is not to give you all a ranking you can use where you can say, I'm a number 1, which is better than number 5, and so therefore my kink is better and superior. Like, please do not use this list in that way. We are only here to offer more communication tools, more understanding, not more boxes and more limitations. So please be more open-minded when you listen to this list. Understand that this can really vary over time between partners, whether you're topping or bottoming or being a sub or a dom. It can really vary a lot. And so you might relate to 1, 2, 3 or more of these different labels, and that's totally okay. I would even expect that to be normal. So with that in mind, what are the levels of sexuality and intimacy within BDSM? I think the first level of intimacy would be when you use BDSM tools as an adjunct to otherwise vanilla intimacy practices. So this is very much like sort of like the trying out bachelorette party level of engaging in kink where you've got toy handcuffs or a faux silk blindfold, or maybe you have some kind of role play costume that's like very frilly and cheap, you know, from a place like Adam and Eve maybe, where it's not like, oh, I can't say that word. It's not like it's not like a big expensive production to have it made. It's like $20. It's from Amazon. You know, it's a French maid. It's a nurse. It's something like that, where it's a temporary costume you put on. And the way you relate to it is very much in that way, where it's a costume. You put it on, you try it out, you put it away later. It's not something that's like endurable as part of your identity. It's not like a personality thing that you are a nurse and you're expressing that with a partner. It's just like, oh, we're trying it for fun. It's fun. It really does not necessarily impact your broader relationship or the way you think about yourself. It's very temporary for titillation, for the taboo of it, the novelty of it, I think more than anything. Again, that's totally okay, but that's one level of relating to BDSM and intimacy. I think the second level of relating to intimacy and kink would be when you use BDSM as a foreplay tool. So with this, what you're doing is maybe you're putting on dom voice and giving somebody orders or expressing your disappointment. You're having a little bit of a back and forth as a sub and a dom, doing some bratting, a little bit of light spanking, light hair pulling. And the intention here is to use the kink as a way of like testing the waters, to go like, hey, like, I'm pulling your hair. Do you want to be intimate right now? Are you in the mood? Can I bring you into the mood? What do you want? Like, it's a way of figuring out, okay, can we take this further into the bedroom maybe? And then once you get to the bedroom, it's really the way they would normally be, but the kink was really the facilitator that helped that experience happen. I think a lot of people, especially people in longer term power exchange relationships, can relate to this, because oftentimes the flavor of your relationship every day is very kinky, but then the individual intimate acts are like pretty non-discernible from more vanilla, typical intimate interactions. There can be the use of things like props or light toys, but the focus itself is still here on the intimacy, not the kink itself. Now, moving on to the third level here, this is when we start looking at BDSM scenes that include using intimate parts of the body. This could be using nipple clamps, CBT, genitorture, anything involving orgasm, crotch ropes, anything along those lines, where the focus is on the intimacy physically and the response to it, and it mentally feels that way. There is a way in BDSM to play with the more private areas of the body, but not think about them that way like it's a tool. It's an extension of accessibility over the body, where it's like, oh, like I'm using this body part because it's here. It's available. It makes a sensation I want it to make, but it's not something I do because it's about how it makes me feel, you know, warm and tingly inside in that way. It's just like another thing, like your hair or your back. This is just one other option we have as a tool for creating the kind of scene space or the physical experience that we want to have. And it's not necessarily common, but it's also not uncommon for there to be more of an ongoing infusion of actual intimate acts with the BDSM acts themselves. I think most commonly they happen after the BDSM is done as opposed to at the same time. I also think if you were to pick out anything on this list that is most like what you would see in a romance novel, this would probably be the most romance novel-esque way of relating to BDSM, where it's very titillating, it's very involved, like the focus on particular body parts is very prevalent, even though full-on intimate acts maybe aren't happening directly in that moment. So I sort of liken it to the usual way you're going to see kink represented in a romance novel, but I am sure that there are romance novels that also buck that trend as well, because I haven't read all of them. So moving on to number 4, this is sort of like the inversion of the last one, which is instead of using intimate parts of the body for the pleasure that they create and using that as a tool in BDSM because of their pleasure and connection, intimacy directly, this is a way of using intimate body parts that denies that pleasure. This would be things like chastity or ruined orgasms or some kind of things, maybe even like cuckolding would fall under this label as well, where you are playing with intimacy and sensuality and all of that, but you're denying it instead of like playing along with it in the typical way that you would in a vanilla setting where it's about achieving a peak of pleasure and the point is like the direct pleasure from it. Here the pleasure is secondary, where like you get pleasure from the suffering or the denial or the humiliation, and that's what you're really driving towards. I would say number 5 is where we get into more of the usual way you will see things at public BDSM events, at a dungeon, or like what is talked about mostly online. And with number 5, what you're doing here is you are engaging in BDSM without any kind of overt stimulation or touching or anything like that, but the BDSM stays in focus while the intimate act happens afterward once the scene is done. This is where you get people who have the stereotype that intimacy always has to be part of aftercare, and they treat aftercare as synonymous with certain intimate acts. And so especially if you are new to BDSM, be very cautious about looking for this one. Ask about it during negotiations right away, because unfortunately there are people out there that will try to hide their relationship to intimacy and BDSM by springing it on you after the fact and then saying, well, because we did this scene together, you are now obligated to do this certain thing for me because that is what aftercare means. That is what everyone does in BDSM, and I need to teach you about this. Everyone does it. Nobody talks about it, but everyone does it this way. That is simply not true. You never have to do anything you don't want to do, and especially you don't have to do anything that you didn't negotiate for. So if they don't ask for something, they don't get it. If you don't ask for something, you don't get it. That's how it works, right? You have to negotiate up front everything that you want to do during a scene, and they have to do likewise. And so don't feel pressured. And if they are acting that way, if you do run into somebody who is like this, they are dangerous, they are bad, they are wrong, they are not representative of how most people see BDSM and what is typical for BDSM, okay? And yes, there are lots of good, ethical people out there that do have this way of relating to intimacy and BDSM, and for them, aftercare is synonymous with intimacy, and aftercare exists in order to facilitate the intimacy happening. It is something that a lot of people relate to, but it is not universal by any means. So with that being said, let's talk about the next way of relating to intimacy and BDSM, which is when you have an intimate flavor to the way that you're doing the scene, but there's not any touching, there's not any kind of like peak of feeling happening during the scene itself, and it's not the goal. And over the course of doing the scene and during aftercare, no actual intimate acts take place. It is not about the intimate acts at all. It is really just focusing on the scene as it's happening. But this is the key here. A lot of people will then use that scene that happened and the aftercare in their own private fantasies later. So you're not doing the act with them or vice versa. It's just like a nice, pleasant thought you revisit again later on your own. It's not really necessarily super hot to you in the moment while it's happening, but it is hot when you think about it later, and that's how you use it. Now, for number 7, this is where we really get into power exchange. And this is when you have a power exchange relationship that is very much centered around and includes a lot of intimate components to it. So this would be when you have rules about like self-touching or certain goals that directly go towards certain intimate acts and being able to perform those to a certain level. This would maybe be picking out what kind of underwear you wear, or having to participate in intimate acts a certain number of times every week, or send naughty pictures, things along those lines. And so the primary feeling of these power exchange relationships is that they feel very intimate, even when intimate acts are not actually occurring. In fact, you could even have a relationship that is very intimate in its power exchange without it including any of the things that I just talked about, as far as like underwear or certain types of control. It can still feel very intimate even when the rules or the structure isn't necessarily centered on that directly. And there's an account that I usually think of when I talk about this that was on Tumblr many years ago. And that account had a power exchange relationship where everything the partner did felt very intimate, even when it had nothing to do with intimacy at all. Like taking out the garbage, or wearing a certain pair of earrings, or sleeping on a certain cushion. All of that felt so charged in that way, where it didn't really matter what it was. It just felt very, very deeply intimate on a moment-to-moment basis. And that's not me at all, but I can really see how that would be fulfilling for a lot of people. And certainly a lot of people's power exchange relationships feel very intimate, even though intimacy may or may not be part of the acts they do during that relationship. And obviously, of course, I haven't said this one yet, but there is a secret, hidden, eighth level of relating to sexuality and intimacy and BDSM. And that would be not including any intimacy at all. And this is me, this is a lot of people, where intimacy in that way doesn't really factor into how we mentally think about BDSM, our motivations for it, anything like that. We're doing it because we enjoy the kink directly, or we enjoy the other feelings that are surrounding it that aren't about intimacy, like the sadness or the fear or the stress relief. And it's not about anything involving certain body parts. Is really about how we feel in here in our brains, without it necessarily being connected to that one very specific thing. And even within relating to it in a non-intimate way, there are many variations within that too, as far as what that means for each individual person. And the point is, really, you don't have to include intimacy in your BDSM at all if you don't want to, whether that be during, before, after, as, the scene itself, whatever way you want to relate to it is totally fine. Including it or not, all of that should be valid. It's about finding partners who relate to it in a similar way that you do, that you can have good, positive, amazing scenes with. And so with that being said, that's really all I wanted to say about these levels of intimacy and sexuality in BDSM. I would be so curious to hear your thoughts in a comment down below if you want to share that with me. What do you think about this? What do you relate to? Anything that I missed as far as some of the key major ways of relating to intimacy in BDSM? I'm sure that I have missed a couple that don't really fall into any of these categories, but I would love to know your thoughts once again in a comment down below, because BDSM is just like so vast, be it with power exchange or topping and bottoming or anything like that. It really is very complicated, and we can do so many things in BDSM so many different ways, and it's like one of the amazing things about it. So if you did enjoy this, you're not already, please do subscribe, because I make videos twice a week about all sorts of different kink and BDSM related topics. I mean, especially with this one, y'all, this was a struggle. I have lost my voice twice. My camera kept going in and out of focus. My neighbor kept revving their motorcycle for some reason during like half of the time I tried to record for today. Like, I genuinely don't even know what was going on, honestly, really. It's been a struggle, so thank you all so much for watching and for being here supporting me. It really does mean so, so much. Be that with a subscription or with supporting me over on Patreon, which is the best way to support the channel. Link to that will be down below. And again, if you do support me there, thank you so, so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.